So after two straight really bad years in 2013 and 2014, the Atlanta Falcons made some changes. They changed the responsibilities of Thomas Dimitroff. They fired head coach Mike Smith, and they decided to go up the Seattle Seahawks coaching tree and bring in defensive coordinator Dan Quinn to be their new head man. So some people thought that the Atlanta Falcons, with a new defensive philosophy, a new defensive approach, with a new man at the helm, might be in tune for a big turnaround, maybe a surprise wild card team in 2015. Now, before the season, I thought that this was still a team that was lacking in talent, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and thought maybe we would see some improvements, but it wouldn't necessarily resonate in the actual win-loss column, and I thought they would maybe be only the third best team in the NFC South. The truth ended up lying somewhere in the middle. Now, I have to confess, the team got off to a hot start, and at one point in time, they're sitting at 6-1. I'm sitting there saying to myself, maybe I was wrong, but then I always had that sneaking suspicion, that gut feeling that this was kind of smoke and mirrors, and that reality was eventually going to set in for this Falcons organization and this team, and that maybe they would still find a way to miss the playoffs. But you start off 6-1, and you're like, man, through 7 games, you're 6-1. That means in your last 9, even if you finish with a losing record, even if you finish 4-5 in those last 9, or maybe even depending on how it goes, 3-6, you have a chance at making the playoffs. But 4-5 in those last 9 games gets you to 10 wins. That makes you damn near a playoff team, and possibly and probably even a playoff team in the NFC. You'd feel really bad if you didn't get there. Well, the Falcons kind of, frankly, had reality, I think, catch up with them. I don't want to say they just fell apart. But instead of going, 4-5 or even 3-6 in their last 9 games, they went 2-7. So they managed to take a 6-1 start and turn it into an 8-8 finish. Sure, it's an improvement over the past couple of years, but it's got to be disappointing. It's got to leave you with if you're a Falcons fan, and even within the Falcons organization, it's got to leave you with a bit of a bad taste in your mouth, because you're sitting here looking at the possibility of what could have been with that season and the reality of what did happen. And you had so much bad momentum to close out the year. Even that late season win against Carolina is nice, and that's a nice feather in the cap. But, Carolina isn't playing in Super Bowl 50, and you're sitting at home watching it because you missed the playoffs entirely because of that horrendous finish to the season. So the Falcons finishing 8-8. They did finish second in the NFC South, not third, but still a long ways away, obviously, 7 games back of Carolina. And they ended up with the number 17th overall pick in this 2016 NFL draft. So it was kind of a really bad situation. Got off to that hot start just to end up being a mediocre, if not bad, football team and not get a top 10 pick where you can maybe perhaps get a real difference maker. So it's going to be really interesting to see what's next for this Atlanta Falcons organization. Now, what went well for them this year? Well, first and foremost, I think part of the key to their early season success was the fact that they had the NFC East on the slate early on in the year. They had, the Eagles the first week. They had the Giants. They had the Cowboys. And I think it was the Redskins. I mean, the point being is that early on in the year, they had all the NFC East teams, and they went 4-0 against the NFC East. So a good thing for the Atlanta Falcons that you would look at and would be indicative of perhaps a playoff team is they beat the teams they were supposed to. They beat the bad teams. And there's no mistaking it. Washington was not a good team. They just were the beneficiaries of a bad situation in terms of that division. The Eagles stunk. The Giants were worse. And the Cowboys were god-awful. And the Falcons pounced, and they went 4-0 against those guys. So it makes it look even worse when you realize they went 4-8 against the rest of the National Football League. But they capitalized on playing against the NFC East in the rotation this year. Then they also had that Week 16 victory over Carolina. Hey, so far they're the only team to have beaten Carolina in all of 2015. Carolina went 15-1 in the regular season. They really handled the Seattle Seahawks, especially in the first half of that divisional round game. Even though the Seahawks made it interesting late, they completely dominated, obliterated, and destroyed the Arizona Cardinals in the NFC Championship game. The Atlanta Falcons were the one team to stick a game to them and actually beat them. The Saints and the Giants had made things close and interesting in the preceding weeks before that, but the Falcons were the one that got it done. And that's something you can make as a feather in your cap, especially if you look at in the Carolina Panthers end up winning Super Bowl 50, then you can sit there and say the Atlanta Falcons were the only team to beat the Super Bowl champions that entire season. That is something that you could positively build on for the future. They also went 3-1 against the AFC South. So they only had 4 other victories if it wasn't against the NFC East, and 3 of them came against the AFC South. Again, that's good stuff. The only team in the South that they didn't beat, if memory serves me correctly, was the Indianapolis Colts. So they beat the Texans, who actually made the playoffs. They beat the Jaguars. They beat the Titans. So the bad teams, they pretty much handled their business against all of them in those other divisions. But that really makes things work worse because that's indicative of the fact that against the rest of the NFL that wasn't in the AFC South or wasn't in the NFC East, they finished 1-7. Ouchies. Julio Jones, though, was a monster this year. You could argue his best season in the National Football League, 136 catches, 1,871 yards, 8 touchdowns. I mean, Julio Jones is a man this year. Julio Jones is a freaking beast. Devontae Freeman, the former 4th-round pick out of Florida State. I mean, when he got that opportunity after Tevin Coleman got hurt early in the year, those of you that play fantasy football know how much Devontae Freeman was able to do. Over 1,600 all-purpose yards, 14 total touchdowns. Is it one of those things where you can count on him long-term to be that kind of franchise feature back? I don't know. That remains to be seen. But for 1 year, man, he was a really nice, pleasant surprise for that Falcons offense because the fact of the matter is they weren't the same in the passing game. They weren't as explosive in years past, but Devontae Freeman helped make up some of that difference. He helped in certain respects, and he had a really, really nice year. But, again, a lot of things ended up also not going well for this organization. Like I talked about, they went 2-7 in their last 9 games. 1-5 against the NFC South. It was great that they beat the Carolina Panthers. Problem is, they lost to the Saints twice and the Buccaneers twice. You just can't do that if you're trying to make the playoffs. Just think about it this way. You beat the Saints once and the Bucs once, and you might be in the playoffs. I mean, that's how razor-thin those margins can be. And that's where you speak to, again, the importance of handling the business within your own division. Because they went 4-0 against the NFC East. They went 3-1 against the AFC South and still missed the playoffs. And they even beat a previously unbeaten Carolina Panthers team in Week 16. A Carolina Panthers team that wasn't backing off, a Carolina Panthers team that wasn't calling off the dogs, a Carolina Panthers team that was still playing all their starters. They were still gunning to win, and the Atlanta Falcons freaking beat them. And they went 1-5 in the division. That was the only victory in the division they had the entire year. Matt Ryan wasn't that good. What did he have, 21 touchdown passes and 21 turnovers? I mean, Matt Ryan, 21 touchdown passes. And you start to wonder if you're getting close to the end of the Matt Ryan reign in Atlanta. He didn't look like a franchise quarterback. He looked quite poor in 2015. Roddy White was a non-factor outside of Julio Jones and, frankly, Devontae Freeman in their passing game. The most consistent contribution that they got was out of tight end Jacob Tamme, so that tells you all you need to know. Defensively, they were butt-naked last in the league in sacks. This was a team that consistently struggled to generate any type of real pass rush whatsoever. 19 sacks on the season. 19. 19 sacks in 16 games. That's barely a little over a sack per game. That's just not good. And then you look at the 2015 draft class that they had. This was a draft class that was supposed to come in and make some big-time contributions, and it still could. It looked like in theory it was a really good draft class. They just didn't get a whole lot out of them. Vic Beasley, the first-round pick, had some occasional flashes, but was far from a consistent force as an edge rusher, as evidenced by the fact that the team finished with 19 fucking sacks in a 16-game season. And they didn't get a whole lot else out of anybody else out of that draft class. So it remains to be seen if that draft class is going to be really good, which is kind of a theme for this Atlanta Falcons organization. And because at the end of the day, it's not that surprising, nor should it be that surprising, that the Atlanta Falcons are a mediocre to bad football team. Because they really haven't done that well in the draft for years, pretty much throughout the entirety of the reign of Thomas Dimitroff. They just haven't. You go back to 2008, where it all began. And they picked Matt Ryan 3rd overall. And they got Croy Bierman, I think, in like the 5th round. But that's all that's left from that draft on this roster. Just Matt Ryan and Croy Bierman. That's it. And Bierman's, a situational rotational player, and Matt Ryan looks like he's taken a clear step back in his game now that he's approaching his 30s. 2009, second-round pick William Moore. I think that's the only player left on the roster from that entire draft class. 2010, nobody's left. 2011, they gave up a ton to go get Julio Jones. And granted, Julio Jones looks like he was worth it because he was special, but there's nobody else left from that draft class in 2011, and in part because of the picks you had to give up in 2012 to get Julio Jones in 2011. There's nobody left from that draft class in 2012 either. So think about that. A span of time from 2008 to 2012. A 5-year stretch where those guys should be the guys aged 25, 26 to 30, 31. These are the guys that should be the core nucleus of your team. These are the guys that should be the leaders in the locker room. These are the guys that should be the franchise marquee pieces. You've got a quarterback that seems to be in severe decline. You got a safety who struggles at times to stay healthy. You got a rotational pass rusher, and you got Julio Jones. The key to building successful, consistent winning teams in the National Football League is the draft. Plain and simple. And it's no surprise that eventually that reality of years of poor drafting caught up to the Atlanta Falcons. You can't cheat it forever. It catches up to everybody. At some point in time, if you want to see a team that is due for a decline or a team that's living on borrowed time, look at their draft history of the previous few years. Eventually, that reality will always catch up with them, and it has the Atlanta Falcons. So in terms of their organizational priorities in 2016, the only thing that really, truly, frankly matters is they have to hit big in this draft. They have to do well in this draft. And primarily, that's going to come on the defensive side of the ball. They need pass rushers. They drafted Vic Beasley, number 8 overall, in the 2015 draft. I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up taking another edge rusher with the 17th overall pick because the need is that great. It could be in a situation where they take a defensive tackle because when you look at their defensive tackles, who the fuck do they really have? Defensive line is a huge need. Their linebacking core stinks too. I don't know if they have anybody that's a really good fit or frankly even a really good player in that 4-3 defense at the linebacker position. They could use a weak side linebacker, a strong side linebacker, or definitely a middle linebacker. It's just really hard for me to sit there and say what the biggest need is on the defense because they have so many needs, in particular in their front seven. Who do they really have that is really a great fit for Dan Quinn's defense? I mean, at this point in time where they would be drafting at number 17, some of the players that would make a lot of sense to me, and I think you even throw in a corner. Somebody to play opposite Desmond Trufant, maybe somebody to play at safety. In terms of that 17th overall pick, there's a lot of different directions that Falcons organization could go in, and it'd be hard to knock them for going in any of those directions. They could end up with a defensive end like a Shaq Lawson or Kevin Dodd from Clemson. Again, those guys would make some sense. Maybe if he's there, an Emmanuel Ogbah from Oklahoma State. Again, a guy that would make some sense. Maybe they look at a defensive tackle like a Jaron Reed. Not a great pass rusher, but he's a guy that's stout against the run with some pass rush potential, but he's just a good football player, period. Maybe a Vernon Butler from Louisiana Tech. Maybe you look at the linebacking core. Maybe the Atlanta Falcons hope and pray that either a Reggie Ragland is still there at 17 or that a Jalen Smith falls to him there at 17. They would have to do backflips if one of those two dudes is still on the board at that point in time. Or maybe they decide a guy like Darren Lee, they can play inside or they can play an outside linebacker, and they would make him with the 17th pick. The simple fact of the matter is defense needs to be the focus. Defense needs to be emphasized. But the sad thing is because they've drafted for so many years so poorly, offense is a pretty big need too. You really have nothing at wide receiver at this moment that's proven outside of Julio Jones. The running back position is pretty solid. But what happens if Matt Ryan continues to decline? Do you really have an answer in the wings? You still don't have a lot at tight end. I mean, they could use a big-time playmaker there. The whole thing of once Tony Gonzalez left, they changed their philosophy. And that philosophy and that approach did not work. And especially now, since Roddy White has clearly declined, there's not a whole lot else there, and he looks like he's close to done. What else do they really have in the passing game other than Julio Jones and Devontae Freeman? You need more. So as much as Matt Ryan has regressed to me in the past couple of seasons, it's not hard to envision why he regressed so poorly, because once you get past those two dudes, who the hell are you going to fucking throw to? I mean, this is a team, they're just not that good. And even the 8-8 record is a little deceiving because they're not even 8-8 good. This is really more, when you look at it objectively from the outside, a 5-win talent football team. The talent that they have and the places that they have it suggests that they're a 4 or 5-win football team. So I wouldn't even be surprised come pick 17 if they like somebody like Laquan Treadwell and he happens to be their wide receiver. It'd be hard to knock him to take that guy because at the end of the day, if he's the best prospect and you have him the highest rated on your board, then you take him because you're in a position right now especially where you just need good football players on either side of the ball. I would expect at the end of the day that the Atlanta Falcons would manipulate their draft board to be able to ensure that they go after defense early and often. Ultimately, that needs to be the name of the game as much as it possibly can be. But and more than anything else, The Falcons just need a good draft, and they just need to draft some damn good football players.